Hey everyone,
Hey guys.
welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be doing a recap of our recent contract. We just finished last week. We just got home yesterday, so our lives are in a little bit of disarray. We couldn't find the microphone, so the video quality or audio quality is not going to be great. But yeah, we have a lot to unpack. We can talk a little bit more about our contracts now that we're done with them, and talk a little bit more about our life plans going forward now that we're back home, and gotten a lot of questions about, with the baby coming, what are we going to do? And so we're going to go over all that stuff. We'll also answer any questions that you guys have just about travel in general. We're live on Facebook and Instagram, so if you have any questions as we go, feel free to ask. Whitney's going to introduce us, and then we'll get started.
All right, hey, for those that may be new to our page, we are Whitney and Jared Kazaza, and we're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We have been travel PTs since we were new grads in 2015. So we've been traveling for a little over 9 years now, so going on a decade, which is kind of crazy. And we've been heavily involved in the travel therapy industry for many years, mentoring others and helping them to get started with travel therapy. Many of you guys may have been longtime followers of ours. Some of you might be new to us on social media, so welcome at whatever stage of your journey you're joining us. If you are newer to our page, we have tons of videos over the years that you can find on YouTube, on our Facebook page, lots of articles on our website. A lot of our newer videos from the last couple of years you can also find in podcast format. Shout out to those of you that will listen to this video later on the YouTube channel or podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can get all of our updates. This video is a little bit more just personal, like life updates, because we definitely get a lot of questions from people about our lives and like what our plans are now, like as Jared mentioned, now that we're gonna be having a baby and starting a family, what are we gonna do? But in general, we usually talk about all kinds of different travel therapy topics. So if you are new, make sure to go back and listen to some of the more educational videos that we've done as well.
Yeah, so I guess the first question we got a lot was, why are we taking contracts? We hadn't worked a contract since summer of 2022, so it'd been almost 2 years since we last took contracts. A few different reasons. One, we were feeling a little rusty. I hadn't been in the clinic for a year and a half, so getting back in, getting reacquainted with the clinic, also getting enough hours to renew licenses, that was important. So that was a big part of it. We wanted to get back into outpatient, wanted to not feel uncomfortable in that setting for the future. We don't know what our future is going to be like in terms of what setting we might work in or if we're working as PTs at all. But if we do, most likely it'll be outpatient. So wanted to just get reacquainted with that setting again. So we took outpatient contracts not too far from home. Another thing we needed was to be relatively close by, but we wanted to go to an area we hadn't explored yet so that we could come back for doctor's appointments for the baby. And we found contracts that fit all of those requirements.
Yeah, Jared hadn't worked since our contracts in Alaska, the summer of 22. I had done some PRN work, but I had been doing it more recently in skilled nursing and assisted living, which is not usually my forte, but I decided to switch it up and try something new. So it was really good for us to both kind of dive back into outpatient since it had been a little while, and that's definitely our preferred setting. We also just kind of wanted to have that experience again. We've done so much travel. For those of you that are familiar with us, even for those of you that are not, we have traveled all over the world. So we don't work full time anymore because we are financially independent and semi-retired. We semi-retired after only 3 years of working like full-time back-to-back travel contracts. So over the last several years, we've only worked like 3 to 6 months a year clinically. And that usually looks like about 1 contract a year, sometimes PRN. So we travel quite a bit internationally and also in the States. We've been to all 50 states, all the national parks. We've done tons of road trips all around the US, including the drive up to Canada, or through Canada to Alaska. We've been a lot of places internationally, but it had been a little while since we actually took a travel PT contract in a new location. And that's always just such an experience. That's like a big part of being a travel therapist, is getting to live and work in a place for 3 or 6 months. And we had been kind of missing that experience a little bit. So we really wanted to do that again before having the baby. But because of knowing that I was already pregnant and knowing that we needed to be somewhat close to home, we had to do one. We would prefer to do one in our home state of Virginia. So we picked a location that was really special in Virginia that we had always wanted to kind of spend more time, and that was Charlottesville, Virginia. For those of you that aren't familiar with Virginia, that's in the central part of Virginia. It's in the mountains. It's where the University of Virginia is. It's a really beautiful place. We had been there a couple times for like weekend trips to go to wineries and things like that, but it was always an area that we were just like, man, if we could work in Charlottesville for a few months, maybe that could be a place that we could even want to live one day. We have friends that love it and they say they want to retire there. So that was a big part of it for us, was just to like have another 3-month experience like that, living and working in a new place. And it was awesome. Like, we definitely accomplished a lot of the goals that we wanted to accomplish with this contract. But we'll dig into it a little bit deeper. There were definitely pros and cons to the overall experience, but I think we got out of it what we wanted.
Yeah. What's up, George? George watching on Instagram.
Yeah, George is not far from Charlottesville in Harrisonburg, Virginia.
Yeah. So in terms of the contracts themselves, we a little bit settled for sure. Whitney, we kind of have a timeline in terms of Whitney didn't want to work too late into the pregnancy, and we wanted to be in the Charlottesville area. So we settled a little bit for sure. Like, we kind of had the idea, okay, we'll take a contract part-time, but we want it to be mostly one-on-one outpatient. And we were just kind of waiting for something like that to pop up. And it didn't really, but these other jobs popped up. They were private practice. We knew they were going to be busier. We decided to go ahead and settle on that just because it was the area we wanted to be in. Everything else was good. So we decided to go for it. And what everyone will learn, anyone that has traveled or anyone that hasn't traveled, what you'll learn as a traveler is that every contract is extremely variable. And that's why you get so many different experiences, so many different stories from people about what travel's like or how it is, if it's good or terrible or whatever. It's because someone could take 4 back-to-back contracts and they're all great, and you think travel's amazing. You could take 4 back-to-back contracts and they're all not very good, and then you think travel's terrible. So every facility is different, and we learned a lot on this contract. Even though we've been doing it for all this time, this contract was different than any other contract we've ever taken before. So we learned a lot on this one, and definitely want to talk more about the contracts themselves and some of the stuff we went through now that we're done with them.
Yeah. By the way, if anybody is watching live, we would love if you would just say hi in the comments and let us know that you're on. I see there's quite a few people on both Facebook and Instagram. Just say hey, let us know you're watching. Let us know if you have questions throughout. Let us know if you're a current traveler or you're a someone who's thinking about getting into travel. We'd love to hear from you. Happy to answer any questions. But yeah, like Jared said, we definitely ended up kind of settling. And sometimes you'll find that with travel contracts, if you are too specific, like say you're like, I really only want to be in Denver. Well, then you'll find yourself making concessions to get to Denver, because you'll be like, the interview didn't sound great, but it'll be all right because I'll be in Denver, right? And so that's kind of how it was for us this time. Like, we were a little bit on a timeline. We kind of had like a very specific area we wanted to be in. We did interview for a couple of other jobs, like within an hour or so of this region, and they were also just kind of like they didn't sound great, but they sounded all right. And then these ones were exactly in the location that we wanted to be in, and they also just kind of like sounded all right. So we definitely settled, and looking back, it's like, oh, we probably shouldn't have settled. There were definitely some red flags with just busy outpatients. So for those of you that are physical therapists, you'll understand this as we talk a little bit more about it. And we've been doing outpatient PT on and off for 9 years. So like, we know the deal, and even more years before that in terms of like internships and shadowing. Like, we know the deal. We know a lot of these private practices are busy. We knew that there was going to be some double booking, but we figured we have been in it long enough to be able to set boundaries on what we're going to do or not going to do. But it definitely threw some hurdles our way that we weren't expecting.
Yeah, it was good for us to be back and being in some of these uncomfortable situations, because we advise people all the time on like what to do with contracts. We all the time get people that are having issues with their contracts, and they ask us, what should I do in this situation? It's very easy to advise someone on a situation you're not actually in, but we ran into a few uncomfortable situations where we had to talk to the manager and explain things that it had been a long time since we actually ran into that type of situation, and realizing what everyday travelers go through that we're talking to and answering their questions was really good for us to see that more recently and see what some of these clinics can be like.
Yeah, so right when we started off, it kind of got hectic from the get-go, because we were both supposed to be at the same clinic location. They have multiple in the area, but then right at the last minute, they were already short-staffed. If any of you guys have been watching the travel therapy market, you know that outpatient PT jobs are very prevalent right now. That did not always used to be the case. Back before 2020, it was actually really hard to find a lot of outpatient jobs, but a lot of people got laid off in 2020. A series of factors happened that now a lot of these outpatient clinics are very desperate, and they have needs everywhere. So this particular chain of outpatient clinics has locations, 5 or 6 within an hour. And so they already were short-staffed. But then between the time that we signed the contract and we actually started those few weeks, they even had some additional people leave, some medical emergencies come up with a different clinician, things like that. So all of a sudden, before we even started, things started to change. So they asked me to go to a different clinic to start out the first 2 weeks, and it just so happened to be that way because of the days that we had agreed that I was going to work versus the days that we agreed that Jared was going to work. So in case you didn't know, we only worked part-time on these contracts, which isn't super common for those of you that are like, how'd you work that out? We've talked a little bit in the past about how that has worked out for us. We have just negotiated it one-on-one individually with the different facilities, and we've only ever done it in outpatient. So we negotiated where I would work 2 days and Jared would work 2 days. And that worked out well for their staffing needs. Obviously, they would have preferred if we could have done full-time, but they were desperate. So the 2 days I was supposed to work, they kind of needed me over to different clinics. So for 2 weeks, I agreed to go to a different clinic with the assumption it was only going to be 2 weeks. And then I was supposed to come back to Jared's clinic that he was at. It just so happened that actually between the time we signed the contract and when we started, my pregnancy symptoms started to get really bad too. So that was like just an extra hurdle thrown in there. This was the first trimester and I was having just a lot of symptoms, and it was I was very emotional, and I was like sick, and I just wasn't doing well. And so my first couple weeks were just overall really rough. So I think from like the second day, I was like ready to quit these contracts just because I was miserable. They had already switched things up on me. It was a lot, the first week of a contract is already a lot because you're like learning all the new patients and you're learning the documentation system. So I cried at work on my second day of work. Which I don't think I'm not a very emotional person. Usually I've never cried at work before. I've never really cried in front of other people unless it was like a funeral or like, I got hurt. And so this was all just very bad timing. So that first week or so was really especially rough for that reason.
Bad timing for her in terms of pregnancy. Also, like I said, for me, I hadn't been in the clinic for a year and a half. So trying to jump back into a busy clinic was rough for me for the first couple weeks too. Whitney does a little better with the busier clinics just because she has more, she's worked more recently, she was more comfortable, but the pregnancy was rough on her too. So both of us had pretty rough first couple weeks. It definitely got better after the first couple weeks, but there was definitely some issues that came up. And like Whitney said, these private practice clinics, they're busy. They have to get a lot of people in to stay profitable. They have to try to encourage certain ways of billing that are definitely iffy. And so we ran into all that. We also ran into some situations where other therapists that we work with had completely different treatment styles and philosophies on therapy. So that definitely caused some issues, especially with sharing patients. So, if you have ever worked in a clinic with a therapist that doesn't treat like you at all, then when you see their patients or when they see your patients, that causes some issues. So ran into those types of things. I think those were really the big issues. And also these busy clinics, we always talk about we don't work off the clock, and we always encourage people also to not work off the clock. So we had to run into a situation where certain days, like one day I had 5 evals and the other slots were double booked, and of course you can't get all that done, especially when you're new to the documentation system. So for a while there, we were putting extra time on our sheets and had to have a conversation with the manager about that. And so we had definitely some rough times on the contract. It wasn't the worst contract for sure, but it definitely wasn't the best. In hindsight, it probably would have been better either to wait for a one-on-one clinic to come up or at least one that was a little less busy. But we made it through.
Yeah, we, like I mentioned, so that first week, I was honestly just ready to quit because it all just seemed like too much. It was just overwhelming. After 2 weeks, which when you're working only part-time, that's only 4 work days, I was supposed to move back to the clinic where Jared was. Well, then they ended up switching me to a completely different third clinic, but it was a lot closer than the first clinic. And also my symptoms started to ease up. And also by that time I had started to get to know the documentation system a little bit better. So things definitely got better after those first 2 weeks for me. But our caseloads kind of kept ramping up. And, sometimes they were even trying to push Jared to see triple books instead of just double books, which we had agreed. The way they scheduled it was 2 on the hour, every hour, unless you have an eval, which is a whole hour one-on-one. We had agreed to see on average 12 patients. And if you know anything about outpatient, when they say on average, that means that sometimes they schedule you more than that because they assume there's going to be somewhat of a cancellation. And again, we've been around the block. We understand that. So, we agreed to be scheduled occasionally, 13 and 14 patients in case of cancellations to get us down to that 12. And we even had some good days where we only saw 10 or 11 and it wasn't that busy. I even had some days at my clinic where I had no evals and like things were going really well. But there were definitely times where they were pushing us to see too many patients and we had to be like, no, you can't triple book us just because the perm staff is agreeing to make these concessions. We did not agree to that. So there were definitely some times where we were just trying to stay under the radar. Like usually our MO is just like, get our work done. If it doesn't need to be said, we'll just try to, keep our heads down, bill the way we feel like is appropriate to bill, treat the way that we feel like is appropriate to treat. But if they keep pushing, there becomes a point where it's like, you have to say something. And so we started by letting our recruiter know from like week 1, like, hey, just want to let you know, these are some of the issues that are coming up. I don't think you need to say anything yet, but we just want to let you know. And the recruiter offered to intervene. The recruiter was like, well, I can have a conversation with the manager, the regional, blah, 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 let me know. But we were like, well, we'll just kind of see how it goes.
Well, and that brings a good point, because often people that ask us questions, they don't know if they should talk to the manager directly or they should talk to the recruiter. I think in a situation like this, I was working directly with the manager. I don't think that you should go to your recruiter and have the recruiter talk to the manager. Instead, talk to them yourself. I mean, you're there with them. Yeah. And so it was that type of situation where I was like, oh, I can talk to him and try to work out something. And eventually we did, but definitely involved a couple uncomfortable conversations. But yeah, in that type of situation, if it's a manager not on site, okay, maybe go through your recruiter or go through whoever your direct supervisor is at your facility. But if it's somebody that you work with directly, talk to them. Don't go to your recruiter. It just makes things very awkward if you're going over their head to a recruiter and then they're hearing you complain from the recruiter when you work with them every day. I think that's kind of awkward.
Yeah, so it basically ended up getting to the point where we had to just say something and be like, hey, this isn't what we agreed to. We're going to treat the way we see fit. We're going to bill the way that we see fit. We agreed to see 12, yada, yada. So we basically had to have, like Jared said, a couple of uncomfortable conversations with the manager. And basically at that point, like, they backed down because, like I mentioned, these clinics are very desperate for outpatient physical therapists right now. And even more so than when we were first hired, they had a couple of like last minute staffing changes, a medical emergency that came up. They really needed us. And it would have put them in a really bad situation had we quit. So they were not willing to let us quit. So they backed down and things got better after that, after we said something. And so quite often, like if you just stand up for yourself and say something, things will change because they don't want to go through the process of losing you and having to hire a whole new person. You don't want to go through that process either because now you've already got housing set up. You've already moved there, all those things. So just if you're in an uncomfortable situation, certainly let your recruiter know, but ideally, like Jared said, if you're working one-on-one with the manager, you're just gonna have to have that uncomfortable conversation and set your boundaries. Say, look, this is what we discussed on the interview. This is what I agreed to. I'm only willing to do this. And 9 times out of 10, it's not like they're gonna fire you.
Yeah, no one likes to have those conversations, but it is better. I definitely learned on this contract, just get it over with. Have the conversation early on. Let them know what you agreed to, what you will do, what you won't do, because just dragging it out just makes it harder on yourself. You're just thinking about it all the time. And so the first few weeks when we were kind of struggling, I was like, okay, it'll get better. I'll be able to work through this. And then eventually when, start having triple books on the schedule, you have to say something. So say earlier than sooner than later will make a big difference in terms of like setting your boundaries and telling them what you will do and won't do. Because I think everyone will agree, seeing 3 people at the same time, you're not going to be able to provide quality care, and it's going to be really difficult. So yes, I know that some therapists do that. I know that some permanent staff, some clinics require that, but it's just not something that we want to do.
Yeah. So overall, just kind of like to recap, like it wasn't the worst contract we've ever had, but it definitely wasn't the best. And it just reminded us why we don't like working in these busy private practices, why we really prefer to work more one-on-one, but it is becoming increasingly difficult to find one-on-one outpatient clinics. We were lucky in that our Alaska and our Hawaii contracts were one-on-one. We have worked in quite a few hospital-based outpatient clinics that are one-on-one in other states. But we interviewed for several in the area of Virginia that we were looking for, and we couldn't find anything that was one-on-one. So, we don't love working in that environment. We suck it out. Luckily, it was just 2 days a week each. So you better bet we were like counting down the days. Like we weren't counting down the days to be done in Charlottesville because we were enjoying Charlottesville.
And the patients were wonderful. It sounds crazy, but we've worked all over the country, and these clinics had the best patients of anywhere we've ever worked. There was not even one patient that I saw the whole time we were there that, like, you have those patients sometimes that you dread seeing. You like see them on your schedule, and you're like, oh, I didn't have any of those this time. So the patients were great. Charlottesville was great. It was just clinics were very busy, and it was a little bit more than we could handle.
Yeah, and so we were definitely, like, especially because we were only 2 days a week, we were like, okay, we have 26 work days. Like, we were counting down our work days just to kind of get out of there. But I mean, it wasn't the worst. It wasn't terrible, but it just reminded us a lot of the things that we don't like about these chain outpatient clinics. We definitely could never work there full time.
And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, these people have all this experience and they got in a situation that wasn't great. Remember that we've worked, I don't know how many outpatient clinics we work now, but this is the most busy clinic we've ever been in. We purposely avoid.
That one in Fayetteville was really
well,
busy.
Your clinic was, mine was.
Yeah, it's not the busiest I've ever worked in.
But anyway, like, you can choose where you want to go to. We settled on this. We knew that it was going to be busy. We could have gone somewhere else in Virginia. There was other one-on-one contracts that we could have taken. It was just areas we didn't really want to go to. So we certainly settled. It's not like all outpatient contracts are going to be like this. Most of ours were, I would say most times we were averaging either 8 to 10 patients a day. Very reasonable. It was just that, we knew that these were going to be busy. We settled on it. Not every outpatient contract is going to be like that. Not every contract is going to be like that. So if having a great work-life balance, not being too busy at work is your priority, then, just realize you might not get the area you want to go to. Instead, make sure you interview these clinics and you're going to somewhere that aligns with your values and what you want to do. Don't choose a chain outpatient clinic that you know is going to be busy if that's not what you want to do.
Yeah, this really goes back to the topic that we discussed a couple weeks ago in our last video about how important we think that the interview is. So it's very important that when you're doing, applying for travel therapy contracts, that you have an interview with manager and you have ask a lot of detailed questions in order to rule out the ones that are going to be more like these mills or like a bad clinical fit. However, even with that said, we're extremely experienced with doing these interviews. We did interview, and we definitely could see that there were a couple of sort of red flags that we kind of just chose to overlook. However, we still feel like, looking back at the interview, there were some things that you just couldn't have predicted from the interview that we discovered upon being there. One of them was a lot of these clinics you'll find, like in private practice, they try to capture the early and the late hours. So you'll see some clinics that are open like 7 to 7, so they can get people before work and after work. And so they asked us if we would be willing to work like the 10 to 7 shift. And we were like, oh yeah, that's fine with us. Like, we're not really morning people anyway. Like, that's fine with us. And we had asked about all the staff that works there, how many physical therapists, how many assistants, do you have techs, front desk, all that kind of stuff. What we didn't necessarily realize is that they didn't always have full coverage for techs and front desk. So sometimes during those late hours, we were the only ones there with no tech and or no front desk. And that really made a difference in our experience with our day-to-day, because now we're having to do extra tasks that shouldn't be assigned to us. And that was something that we didn't really think to necessarily ask during the interview. And then in addition to that, some of it was just more like clinic dynamics, the personalities and things like that, just you can't really predict until you get there. So even if you do a really thorough interview, it may still not be exactly what you expected when you get there. But then that's just goes back to the point of having to set boundaries and say, hey, this isn't what I was expecting. This is what I'm willing to do. This is what I'm not willing to do.
Yeah, and it's funny how you just continuously learn things as you travel. And, we have a article, video about interview questions and all that, but I would now add to any future interviews that we ever do, if I ask about support staff, I'm going to ask, is the support staff there the hours that I'm going to be there? Because that that was a huge difference. Like the first few weeks, sometimes I would have a double book and then an eval come in, and I have to go up front and give them paperwork and check them in and take their payment.
You had to take their copay. We've never worked at a place where, as a physical therapist traveler, he had to take the copay and check the person in and do all this stuff because there was no support staff to do it. It's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, so that makes things hard. I mean, it's hard to predict that type of thing, but obviously if you have 2 people there and you're trying to check an eval in and all this stuff, there's going to be problems. And so it's the kind of stuff you run into that you didn't even know that you should ask, that you should definitely ask. So yeah, add that to your list of interview questions. Is the support staff going to be there when your hours actually are? Because sometimes they're not.
Yeah, and I will say too, I worked at 3 different clinics throughout my time here. I moved around to 3 different ones. All 3 of them were completely different. The scheduling was different, the staff, the way they ran things was different, the management was different, the patients were different, everything was completely different, and it was all within the same region. And so I think it's really important to, when you guys are trying to find contracts and you ask for advice, a lot of people will ask for advice in different groups and things like that, and they'll say, what do you think of XYZ company? And you'll have some people that are like, it's the worst company ever, absolutely never take a job with XYZ company. However, in our experience, having worked all over the country in lots of different locations, we've actually worked for the same company at multiple locations before and found quite often it's really very different depending on where you are. And this contract was no different. Those 3 clinics I worked in were completely different, some of them better than others in some ways. So don't always just take blanket advice about whether a company is good or not. You really, if it's an area that you want to be in, you may want to give that company a chance. And be sure to do your due diligence and ask a lot of questions in the interview, but sometimes they're not so bad. Like a couple, of the clinics that I worked at this contract were better than others.
Yeah, definitely important things to consider. You do see that all the time in groups. People will harp on how bad a company is or how good a company is, and a lot of times it's just the individual clinic you're at. It's not a reflection of the whole company in general, so be careful taking advice like that. So anyway, contracts were not great, made it through. Some of the benefits though, like I said, patients were really wonderful. Me being back in the clinic, treating again after a year and a half, I was very nervous. I think the longest before this I'd been off between contracts or between working with patients was like 15 or 16 months. So this was the longest I'd ever been out of the clinic. I was nervous to get back in, and it was actually really good. I really enjoyed working with patients again. It made me reinvigorated for physical therapy in general. We even have had conversations now about potentially opening our own clinics in the future. We know how we've been at all these clinics now. We know how the different clinics run and how we would want to run things if we had our own clinic. And it sounds like it could be fun to be a clinic manager or own your own clinic now with a little bit less pressure. And so being back in the clinic was great in terms of that. I think Whitney also had a good time with all the patients. So got over a lot of that. We got the hours we needed. Everything was good in terms of the clinics themselves.
Yeah. And I will say too about that, like we've talked about before, we're in a really good place in our careers where we saved so much early on from being traveling physical therapists. We were able to work back-to-back contracts for a few years, put a lot in savings and investments early on so that we could semi-retire and transition to working part-time. What we did was a little bit aggressive. Now, I wouldn't say that most people are going to be able to just only work 3 years and then go part-time from there, but it's definitely realistic as a travel therapist to be able to take off, maybe work 9 months, take 3 off. Or do some form of that sort of thing. And so I think having transitioned to that form of clinical practice, it's really helped us to have the time and space to step away from physical therapy and still really enjoy it when we do it. Because when you're stuck in some of these jobs, like we get emails and messages from physical therapists and OTs and speech therapists who are feeling really burnt out from their day-to-day, 40, 50 hours a week. Especially like PTs that work in private practice outpatient, it can be really daunting. So now that we've, focused on our finances and we've really been able to set ourselves up into a position in our careers that we enjoy, where we work sometimes, but really on our own terms, it's so nice actually when you get back in there and you're like, you know what? Today's schedule looks a little bit busy, but I'm gonna just enjoy like each and every time I have to spend with a patient, because you can make such a difference in these patients' lives. And I think we saw that more than ever with these patients. We had some really wonderful patients at this contract, and it really reinvigorated us for physical therapy in general. It definitely made us realize like, oh, there's so many things wrong with our profession in terms of like the insurance model and the productivity demands and all of that. But the actual practice of helping someone with physical therapy or whatever your career is, occupational therapy, speech therapy, it's so beneficial and it's so helpful to these people. And so I'm so glad that we've worked to a point of financial independence to where we don't have to be burnt out working 40 and 50 hours a week, and we can still really appreciate the time we spend with patients.
Yeah, I recommend that to everybody. If you can get to a point where you're working 3 or 4 days a week and you're not just in there all the time treating, and you really do get burnt out, or you get almost like empathy fatigue where it's hard to really care as much as you did when you first started. I feel like that has gone away from me because now we work so infrequently, and when we do, it's part-time, that when I'm in the clinic, I really do care about every patient and everything they're saying and want to do the best job I can. Whereas I can remember when we were in the midst of working constantly, working as much as possible, there was times I was just trying to get through the day, and I'm sure everyone has been there before.
Yeah. So if you are like newer to our page and you've seen some of our finance content and you're like, why are these PTs talking about finance? It's honestly so integral to your work-life balance that you get a good hold of your finances, because it has changed our lives. Like, I didn't know anything about finance back when I was younger, when I was in school. Jared somehow had a passion for it and chose to go out of his way to learn a lot about finance on his own. Obviously, we don't learn that stuff in high school or college or PT school, unfortunately. And so the fact that he really delved into it early on and taught me so much, it has set us up to be in such a good position, just work-life balance-wise. So no matter what stage of your career you're in, whether you're a student, you're a new grad, you're an experienced clinician, we cannot overstate how important it is for you to just spend some time to learn about finance and get control of your finances so you can take control of your lifestyle the way you want it to look. Because maybe you still really enjoy being a therapist, but you're just not enjoying it because you're stuck there 50 hours a week and you're really burnt out.
Yeah.
And if you can get a control of your finances and design your work life the way you want it to look, then you can still really enjoy being a therapist. Because unfortunately, we hear so many people trying to just leave the profession now. They're always looking at non-clinical career options and how can I get out of this? That may be the answer for some people, but maybe for some people it's just getting control of their finances so they can work part-time.
Yeah. And then in terms of the area, Charlottesville, we really were glad that we went to Charlottesville. Charlottesville is beautiful. It was awesome. It was a great time that we were there. Very similar to our hometown, 2 hours away, but hiking, we have hiking here too, but they're closer to the national parks. So we spent a lot of time going to the national parks on the weekends, or the national park on the weekends. Shenandoah.
National Park.
A lot of wineries up in Charlottesville, just a very beautiful place. It was nice having the college campus nearby. Saw a bunch of students in the clinic, so different patient population. There's a good mix of young students there, and then also older people. It's a nice mix. It's a cool town. A lot of diversity in terms of the people there. So we really enjoyed Charlottesville. We were glad we worked there. And
yeah, we mentioned the wineries because in the past that was like the only reason we'd ever gone to Charlottesville, is like that's big, like a big part of like Virginia's wine country. And so of course it's like a bummer, like, oh, I'm pregnant, and now we have all the wineries at our fingertips. But we did go to quite a few still, just because like many of you may also just enjoy going to like wineries and breweries. It's usually just like a nice outdoor area. In the springtime, it's so nice to just be there. Usually they have good food too, and a lot of times now they have non-alcoholic options, so I was able to find some non-alcoholic options to still be able to enjoy the vineyards and the wineries and all that stuff. But we did a ton of hiking. I've been trying to stay active throughout the pregnancy. Now, there definitely was a period during my first trimester where I was not feeling well and I was super fatigued and I couldn't do very much. But starting like the third week of our contract, I was able to get back, which I was, I don't know how far along then, like 10 weeks or 11 weeks pregnant. I was able to get back into hiking, and we built back up to where we were even doing some like 8, 9, 10 mile hikes along the Appalachian Trail and in Shenandoah National Park. So we got in some really good hiking there, some great views. Spring in Virginia is phenomenal, although the heat heated up a little bit earlier this year, like in late May and all through June. It was really hot compared to what it usually is, but we still were able to very much enjoy the area. There's also a lot of history around there. So we're right near Monticello, which is Thomas Jefferson's home, James Monroe's home, a lot of like the presidential history there. We also went to Williamsburg one weekend. So if you ever heard of like colonial Williamsburg and historic Jamestown, like the original first settlement. And even though we're from Virginia, we hadn't done a lot of that stuff. And so it was actually really nice to just be closer to that stuff and explore kind of in our own backyard, if you will. We often tell people that like you don't necessarily have to travel across the country to have a new experience. If you're uncertain about moving across the country for travel therapy, try taking a contract just in your home state or in the neighboring state, and you can still have a wonderful new experience because you're looking at things through a new lens.
yeah, so if you ever get a chance, check out Charlottesville. Probably pick a clinic that's not too busy, but Charlottesville is a great place to be. If you see a contract pop up there, I would definitely recommend it, or just stopping through vacation-wise or on a road trip. It's a cool place to check out.
Yeah, if any of you guys ever get a chance to take a contract in Virginia, we're obviously partial to it. We're not big Northern Virginia people, just be like closer to DC just because it's too hectic up there. We don't like all the traffic, but a lot of people really love Northern Virginia. There's a lot to do up there. We are more partial to like Central and like Western Virginia. Lots of beautiful places. So if you ever get a chance, let us know if you're in the area. We love Virginia. So we really had a great time in Charlottesville.
Yep. All right, so plans for our future. In the short term, it's only 4 months till the baby's due now, so gonna nest a little bit. Whitney's definitely ready to nest back at home right now, get a nursery ready, that kind of stuff, registries, baby showers. So a lot of that is what we're doing right now. We're still house hunting, haven't really found anything that looks perfect to us, but we have all the time in the world. We've got a perfect place here right now. It's no big deal. We're just looking for more of like a forever type home, I guess. A little bigger, more land, that kind of thing. But where we're at right now is perfect. We own this townhouse and we can stay here as long as we need to, but we're just still kind of roughly looking. If something great popped up, we would take it.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, we've had a townhouse for a little over 4 years now. It's hard to believe. We bought it in April of 2020. Can't believe it's been 4 years now. And the townhouse has been really good for us because it's in a townhouse complex. So there's little maintenance that we have to do. It's my mom lives nearby. We have family that can check on it. It's been really good for us, especially just like coming in and out of town through all of our travels. And we have enough bedrooms and space to have the baby here. It's just in the long term, we definitely want a bigger house, more of a forever home. We want to have a little more land and a little more space. We don't want to be like in like a complex with other, like we have a parking lot and like, you know, neighbors that are very close. So that's not our ideal for long term. We have gone back and forth over the years about where we want to quote unquote settle down. Back in the day, we used to think like, oh, we'll do travel therapy for 5 years and then we'll full on settle down into permanent jobs. And a lot of you may go into travel therapy thinking the same thing, but over the years, our philosophy on that has evolved. Now we're at the point of financial independence where we don't ever plan to have permanent full-time jobs. And so we do want that stability of kind of like having a home base and being settled down, but we also want to maintain the flexibility to just do what feels right. But we've gone back and forth about where would that be? Where would our home base be? And we've been to all 50 states. There's pros and cons to all of them. We've even considered international. Like for a while, we were like, oh, we're definitely gonna move to Portugal. And like when we went to New Zealand, we were like, New Zealand's incredible. We'd love to move to New Zealand. But realistically, when it comes to having young children and starting a family, we just know that being close to family is extremely important to us. And we love Virginia. It overall encompasses most of what we want in a place to kind of settle down. It's relatively low cost of living, relatively low natural disasters. It's got a lot of outdoor nature. We've got all 4 seasons here. Overall, we really enjoy where we're from. And so ultimately we have decided we're going to probably buy a house here and this is going to be our home base. So like Jared said, we are kind of house hunting this summer. We only have 4 months until the baby comes. So pretty much if we see a great house that's perfect for us in the next 2 months, we would make a move on it. But if we don't see it in the next 2 months, we don't want to be moving too close to the end of the pregnancy. So we would just stay put for another year or so and kind of like put off looking for a house until next year.
Yep. We got a lot of questions about traveling now that the baby's coming, what we're going to do after the baby. We have no idea. We have 2 short trips planned this summer, one to the beach, one to Colorado. We're doing a road trip around Colorado, seeing some friends there. So those are the only trips we have planned, but after the baby comes, we're not going to plan anything. We're just going to see how things go. We have no idea what that will be like yet. So we're just going to take it as it comes. We're definitely not planning to take travel contracts anytime in the near future. But I mean, if everything goes well with the baby and we definitely aren't ruling out taking contracts in the future as well. So we'll just kind of see how things work out.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have, been like, oh my gosh, like, there's more and more people now that are taking the baby on the road, taking travel in an RV. You can find a YouTube or an Instagram about any kind of travel with kids now, and it's definitely more doable. We know a lot more travel therapists that are traveling with children now. We know a lot of people who travel internationally and take road trips and do all kinds of things with children. I would say for us, like, we are just happy to have the flexibility that we do with our lifestyle. We don't have to commit to anything right now. If it feels really good to be home and stay home forever, then that'll be great. But if we start getting the itch to travel again, we can do that because, like I said, we don't ever plan on having full-time staff PT jobs. So we're not locked into anything. If it feels right to take the child and travel, then we will. If it doesn't feel right, then we won't. And as far as like our clinical practice, we're probably going to do a little bit of PRN while we're home. And then I'll probably just, once the baby comes, take time off for probably about a year. Unless I just am really itching to get out of the house and I have a PRN job, I could do a couple days here and there if I wanted to. As Jared mentioned earlier, we've even talked about in the future opening our own clinic or gym. If we do decide that we want to be more settled here, that is definitely something that we've considered pursuing, but we wouldn't do that within the next year, probably until we kind of see how things go with the baby. So we're not immediately gonna jump into something like that.
A longer term thing, but it's always been a dream of mine to have a gym. And then, I mean, obviously as PTs, why would you have a gym and then not have some sort of clinic where you're treating patients or seeing patients? Sometimes it's something I do enjoy. I do enjoy treating patients, just not full time. So maybe we've talked about opening a clinic where maybe we alternate days. Maybe I work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Whitney works Tuesday, Thursday, and we can set it up exactly how we want and see patients one-on-one, that kind of thing. Doesn't have to be that profitable, so we could just do it because we want to do it, not because we have to do it. So that could be in the future, but we'll see. Definitely still could take travel contracts though. Just see how this next year goes.
Yeah, and we also have friends in the area who, we have friends that own gyms that we have the option to, like, if we wanted to open up like a small PT practice within somebody else's gym, that's an option that exists. We have friends that own their own small private practices that do more like one-on-one care. So we have options there. We know lots of people that have opened their own practice in other areas that we can get advice from. So if that's a route that we decide to go, we just have a lot of options, which we're so thankful for at this stage of our lives. I think we used to, back when we were newer graduates, we used to worry. And I'm sure some of you are in this camp too. You worry like, well, if I start taking time off, what about the gaps in my resume? If I travel for a while and then I want to come back and settle down, is anybody going to hire me? Am I going to be a desirable candidate? We have zero worries about any of that anymore. We feel like we've gotten such a good, well-rounded clinical background in traveling, and we've never been questioned about taking time off. If anything, I think it's helped us because it's a good basis of conversation of how much life experience we have now. So we have no worries about being able to be employable or start our own thing.
Yeah, in the therapy world, I think that is a fear that people have that is not really founded anymore, because the clinics are desperate for therapists. As long as you maintain your clinical skills, you're not completely rusty, and you're a fairly personable person, you're good at communicating. Like I said, I've taken 16 months off once, I've taken 6 months off, this last time was a year and a half, taken huge gaps, and never once has a manager had any issues with that, and really, usually they don't even ask about it. So I think some people have fears of that, but I really don't think that's a thing in therapy. I don't think you're really ever going to run into a situation where you're going to get turned down for a job because you've taken time off or you've taken travel contracts or anything like that.
Now, we have worked with a couple of clinicians that took more extended periods of time off to raise a family. We've had contracts before where we were there and a therapist had taken 5 or 10 years off for one reason or another. Most of the time it's to raise a family, and then they try to come back. We have noticed that some of those clinicians do have a little bit of trouble adapting back, especially with things like newer EMR systems and things like that. But it wasn't that they weren't hireable, it's just that it was a little bit harder for them to transition back. The facilities were willing to hire them, they needed their help, but they just needed a little bit more training and ramp up time to get back up to speed. So if possible, I would recommend not taking off that much time just for your own clinical skills and your ability to like adapt back to the clinic. But after a year and a half or a year, we haven't felt too rusty. Of course, it's always great to keep up with your CEUs and things like that, so that make sure that you can jump right back in and stay relevant and up to date with your clinical practice. But yeah, we're not too worried about our employability or our ability to adapt and start our own thing in the future if that's what we choose to do. But yeah, right now we're just super excited for this next phase. Mostly gonna just take off clinically for a while, other than maybe just a little bit of PRN here for the foreseeable future, just getting ready to like start a family, and it's gonna be a whole new journey. And we are honestly looking forward to being home for the next 6 months to a year, because we have been traveling so much. Jared's about to publish an article. Actually, he's already written it. I just need to edit it and get it posted here in the next couple weeks about all the travel that we've done over the last several years, and it's so much.
It's so much.
I mean, gosh, we haven't spent more than just like a month or so at home in years. So honestly, we're craving a little bit of that stability, and I think it's going to be super nice. But we keep joking, like, oh, what if after 3 months we're just so bored at home and we can't wait to travel? In which case, I don't know, we'll go travel. Like, we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll
could happen.
Put the baby in a carrier and go, but we'll see.
It's always funny to me, the grass is always greener, I feel like, and that applies no matter what you're doing, because when we're traveling, we just want to be at home, and then if we're at home too long, we just want to travel. So I'm sure everyone can relate to that too. Most people work in permanent jobs, you just want to travel, but I can tell you that if you travel too much, it also gets old. You crave stability. So yeah, we're excited right now to have some stability, be back home. We're going to continue working on the business, of course. We'll make videos. Actually, we hit some recent milestones that are pretty cool. We just recently crossed 700,000 all-time page views on the Travel Therapy Mentor website. Fifth Wheel PT is over 300,000. So between the two websites, 1 million page views. That's insane. And then we also just recently crossed 8,000 emails that we've gotten through the websites. So people asking questions, people asking for recruiter recommendations, hot jobs, those types of things. 8,000. That's a huge number. So business is going well. A lot of people reaching out to us all the time. So
yeah,
we're
and
going to continue with that.
More of you guys are finding us on social media. We have almost 19,000 of you in our audience on Instagram, and I think 7,000 plus of you on Facebook. So we really appreciate all of your continued support and following along. So don't worry, we're not going anywhere in terms of Travel Therapy Mentor. If anything, we're going to have more time for Travel Therapy Mentor content wise, because we're going to be home a lot, have tons of articles and videos and stuff that we want to get out to you guys to continue to educate you to live your best life as a travel therapist. So please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Honestly, we just want for so many of you to find an amazing work-life balance like we have, to pursue your own form of financial independence, to be able to travel the world. We've been able to take travel healthcare and turn it into just this whole lifestyle. And it's been, I'm not exaggerating when I say life-changing. I mean, there's no way we could have traveled to all the states and all the national parks and so many countries and just had all the different experiences that we had if it wasn't for travel physical therapy. So we're really thankful to have found this path, and we really honestly want to help so many more of you have a good experience, because we hate when we hear from therapists that are feeling so burnt out and so just jaded with the profession when we know there's other options and other avenues out there for you. So
yeah, we've talked about this. We've made videos and articles in the past about like fighting burnout with travel therapy. And we really do feel like it's extremely helpful for a lot of people. If you're stuck in a permanent job, if you can start taking travel contracts, be very selective, find the good ones, make twice as much money. I mean, it's really not out of the ordinary at all anymore to make twice as much take home on a travel contract as you would at your permanent job. Work 6 months a year, take time off, do other things that you enjoy. It just feels so much better in terms of your work-life balance, or maybe transition to part-time travel contracts like we have, something like that. It can really just make a difference in your life. So more and more people, I think, are realizing that they don't really want to work in the clinic 40 hours a week, full-time, 50 weeks a year. So we think travel therapy is a great way to kind of transition and do some other things and have more time to enjoy your life, more time to travel, pursue hobbies, those types of things.
Yep. So stay tuned. We'll still be putting content out there. Again, we don't know what life's going to look like when the baby comes. That could, for a couple months, we might slow down just a little bit while we focus on the baby, but still keep an eye out for some new content from us. Feel free to reach out to us, send us an email or a message on social media if you have questions. We would love to help you get started and help you on your own journey.
Yep. And if you have any content suggestions, I'd love it, because I feel like I've written almost about everything I could possibly think of to write about travel therapy, but every now and then we get a question that I'm like, oh yeah, I should write about that. So if you have any ideas on articles or videos that we can talk about, give our perspective, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, and quite often we'll go back and redo some of the older topics that we've done in the past, because it's some of the essentials and the basics that you need to know about travel therapy for our new followers. So we'll bring some of that stuff back around. We're going to be doing our next video in 2 weeks is going to be a job market update. It's been a little while since we did a travel therapy job market update, so we'll be collecting the stats from all the companies that we work with here over the next week after the 4th of July holiday. And then we'll bring you that content in 2 Sundays from now. So stay tuned for that if you want to kind of get an idea of what's going on with the job market. We have more and more new grads reaching out to us asking for help getting started. It's a great time for that. We've also had quite a few clinicians that are thinking about leaving their permanent jobs to jump into travel therapy. So if you're listening and you're in one of those boats, please reach out. If you want to fill out our recruiter recommendation form on our website, we'd be happy to connect you with some of the top recruiters that we work with and help you to get the ball rolling.
Yep. I don't think we had any questions. We had a few comments on Instagram.
Okay, let's see what anybody had to say. Yeah, if anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to leave them now, and we'll go through that before we wrap up. Melody says hi from Marvel. Let's see, who else? Ooh, Caden says regarding patient caseload that he has 17 patients scheduled tomorrow. That is too many in our opinion. I think the most you ever had in a day was like 16 at this contract.
Yeah.
And that was still too much.
16 that I saw in one day.
Yeah.
I think I had 17 or 18 scheduled a couple times.
I think the most I saw in a day was 14 at these contracts, but still not ideal. We don't like to see more than 12. So good luck, Caden. I hope that it goes okay. Maybe you should put your foot down and say, no, I'm not going to do that. All right, let's see if there's anything else. Hi, Angela. Hi, Samantha, current OT traveler. Good to hear from you. Hi, John. Hey, George. Let's see if there are any other comments or questions. And then we had a couple of people say hello on Facebook as well. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. That's a little update on our lives. And yeah, for the foreseeable future, we'll be hanging out in Virginia. Our next trip is to Colorado at the end of July. So stay tuned for that. Have some fun content for you there. And then lots of other Travel Therapy Mentor content coming your way soon.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.